Welcome back to D&D Module Monday, the show in which I read a module and then talk about it for however long I see fit. Today's episode, one I'm excited to talk about, the Ghost Tower of Inverness. This is a very, very, very fun module. Now, it was originally a tournament module played for the first edition Advanced D&D game for character levels 5 through 7. Now, what makes this module very interesting to me is that it was true and true a tournament module, but it is also largely a puzzle module, kind of in the sense of Tomb of Horrors. But unlike Tomb of Horrors, it is not diabolical, it's not horrendous, it's not evil. It is reasonably designed with puzzles that make sense and interactions and encounters that might actually, dare I say, be fun. Now, as this was a tournament module, it was set up and played much differently than most other modules. Now, it was written, as I will say, I'll just read it. The module was originally written for the official Advanced Dungeons & Dragons trademarked game tournament at WinterCon, 8? WinterCon 8, held in Detroit in November of 1979. It is the second in TSR's competition series, modules that were used in official tournaments. This module contains a challenging setting, a scoring system, and characters specifically prepared for the adventure. It may thus be used for competition among players or groups of players, or as a non-scored adventure in an ongoing campaign. Also included within are background information, referees' maps and notes, encounter descriptions for players, and a background scenario linked to the World of Greyhawk fantasy setting. So, as you can hear, what makes this module to me interesting is that, at least in the tournament standpoint, which is obviously the original function that it was developed for, it is effectively almost a plug-and-play module. You also have to forgive me as I start flipping through the pages. Whoever had this before me, there are some coffee stains on the pages and whatnot. But anyway, that just gives it character. Anyway, the story, effectively, of the Ghost Tower of Inverness. And I'll get into this just to get through it. Wherever the hell it is. The preliminary setup. Basically, the tournament background. So, basically, the characters, there are 5 characters to choose from. All of whom are criminals. So, you're playing as a criminal who have been summoned by the Duke who holds them prisoner. Except for one person. There's a monk who's not a criminal. There's a monk who's, like, in his service. Because reasons. But he basically tells them, hey, look, I really want a mystical jewel called the Soul Gem. And if you guys go into this tower, the Ghost Tower of Inverness, and get me the Soul Gem and bring it back, I will let you go, basically. Now, you have these characters that are set up, and you're really, at least as far as from a tournament standpoint, supposed to play as these characters. So if I can find the character sheets here, like, see, there's the coffee stain. Look at the coffee stains. Look at it. But the reason I say you're supposed to play as these characters, and I understand this is a very odd way of going through this module, but bear with me. It just makes sense if I point this out now. It makes life easier. So this page pulls out. In fact, there are a lot of pages in this module that pull out. Why do these pages in the module pull out? Because you're supposed to give these, potentially, you can actually, I don't know if you could tell, these pages are like stitched, so you can actually rip them apart. And the reason for that is you're supposed to give these to your players. So whoever is playing as Lembu, the lawful neutral human fighter, you are supposed to give him this character sheet. It says here, cut the chart here so that you can split these 2 pages. Because all of these characters are predetermined. Same with Li Han, a lawful neutral human monk. She's the one who is in the service. Level 7. And there's also, obviously, there's one for the magic user and the cleric, and then there's another one somewhere for the thief. Not sure. Oh, is it there? No, that's the thief. Here for the thief. Now, and I gotta make sure I put this back together correctly. Oh, jeez. Oh, goodness gracious. Hang on. Oh, wait. Visual. Wait, that's visual aid too? Oh, Jesus. Okay, we're not gonna do this now. we're just gonna, I think that's it. Okay, I got it. I've got it. Nothing. There is nothing to worry about, I don't think. Yep, there we go. Anyway. So you're supposed to cut these cards out and give them to your players at the tournament. So that they can say, so when your players sit down at the table and say, I want to play as Leon, or I want to play as, what's the magic user's name? The magic user is Hodar. And then you have Zenithar, who they're all neutral, which I find kind of funny. At least I think they're all neutral, because they in the opening, the Duke describes like horrible deeds that they did, so you'd think they'd be evil. But anyway, you were supposed to cut this stuff out and give it to the players. Then you're supposed to use this, the ducal, which is the name of the palace, the ducal armory prices, and you're supposed to outfit your characters. You have a total of 25,000 gold. Your players have to decide amongst themselves who gets what to outfit themselves with. There's also, that's just the continued list. And this is all supposed to be done beforehand, right? So then, once you're set up and your characters have their sheets and everything else, you're supposed to play this module within a time limit of 3 hours. Okay, so now that we've got that sort of way, that you are supposed to play as these predetermined characters if you're doing this as a tournament. If you're not, if you're doing this just at home, you can play as your own characters. But if you're doing this as the tournament decrees, I just realized I should not have that page open, because there's just full nipple there. And the last thing I need is YouTube getting frustrated about that. I didn't even, I kind of forgot about that. Maybe we'll just go back to the cover. This is some sort of episode. So after you've handed out the information and your players have decided who they're playing as of the 5 characters, they've outfitted themselves, no doubt arguing over the gold, you are then supposed to start a timer and send them into the module itself. Now, the module also makes use of, because you have to remember this was a tournament, so actually if I now go all the way to the back of the book, this here, this is for the Dungeon Master, but there's also, if I just flip another page, this here is the tournament scoring sheet. There was basically, when certain events were fulfilled, the team would get points, and if players themselves did specific actions, especially if they did things exceptionally well, they would get extra points. We will see that later. That's all decreed in the various encounters. But in order to make this system fair, when characters dealt damage or when they took damage, they either gained or lost points respectively. So when you were playing in a tournament format, there was really no dice rolling outside of like seeing to see if you hit, and then damage was averaged. So if your fighter could realistically had a longsword and did 1d8, I believe they called it 5. They would say you did 5 damage and you gained 5 points. And so everything was averaged as a means of trying to make the scoring system as fair as possible, the scoring of which was obviously then kept by the Dungeon Master. As you can see here, there is a sort of equation here where you take this stuff and add it all together. And then if you were quicker, you also got more points. Now, you only had 180 turns. But if you could get things done faster, you would get more points. And obviously, if multiple tables were doing this, then they could all be either pitted against each other, or you could pit the players at the table against each other. But this was an honest-to-goodness, in my opinion, what is more of an honest-to-goodness tournament module with the scoring system, obviously part of the, as they call it, the competition series, which is why this is called C2. But the reason I say this is an honest-to-goodness tournament module is because, like, Tomb of Horrors claimed to be a tournament module, but it really wasn't. Like, there was nothing really tournament-like about it. This is a proper tournament module with being pre-baked in, being already set up, and having all of this already done, it's very, very interesting, and a very interesting look at what tournament that you don't really think of D&D tournaments today, but like there were, and this was how they did it. They sort of normalized everything and made things as fair as they could with a certain amount. I mean, any game needs to have some sort of variability, but this was how they did it. Okay. Now that we have all that explained, and obviously again I should point out, if you are not playing in a tournament, you can just play with your characters, your players' characters, obviously assuming they're of the correct level. You would need to set up the beginning a little differently. They probably wouldn't be prisoners of the Duke, but maybe the Duke is just calling them into service or whatever. And then you go into the Ghost Tower of Inverness and to find the Soul Gem. So now, and again, get rid of this. I'll show you the maps here. This is both a map of the tower and the maps of different levels. The goal, really, of the dungeon, you could start going through it here. We could start going through it here. Now, and again, and I brought up there is some variability. There are, so I guess I should talk about this now, how well prepared I am. As much as I really like this module, I guess they figured, the one thing I dislike about it, I guess they figured that 3 hours or what they had made within that tournament landscape that I just explained, between keeping score and everything and all, I guess they decided that wasn't enough to charge for a full-fledged module. So for this home release, they actually added a bunch of encounters. They added things like wandering monsters, as you can see here from the charts. I don't think it's bad, but the problem is, basically, this module tries to be two things. It tries to be the original tournament module, and it tries to be a module that you can use for your home game. And the issue I have with that in some respect is that if you'll see here, this is a great example. Although it's not, because it's a coffee stain. Can I find another example? Great. Here we go. If we look here, right, so number 10, the tunnel room. This is just an average thing, an event that takes place in the Ghost Tower. If you see here, number 11 right next to it, it says the bead curtain, and 11 is in parentheses. And next to the bead curtain, it says, in parentheses, not for tournament use. So you have all these different events, all of which are detailed on the map here. But many of them are you get what I'm saying? It's a little confusing. And it was something I noticed as I read through it, that there was stuff that was for the tournament or not for the tournament. It's a little confusing to sort of get right and keep straight. I don't think it's necessarily bad. More content is always good. But as far as the readability of this module, it did, in my opinion, get a little confusing. I think it would have been better, ironically, if maybe it just stuck to the more tournament format. I don't think it's bad. I think this would be a very fun module to run with a group, and I'll talk about more about why about some of these areas. I think it would be a fun module to run with an existing group, but I think there was obviously so much thought that went into the tournament aspect of this. I think it's so well done that I think the obvious attempt to flesh it out, while I don't hate it, I do think it makes things a little confusing, and it's not what I would have leaned into had it been my module. If I were trying to figure out how to send this to people, I probably would have just said this is supposed to be a one-shot, play it with the characters, If you want to add a few new encounters, that's great, but I think trying to do both is just a little, it was confusing to me. It might not be confusing to you. You might be sitting here saying you sound like a dumbass, you're just stupid. Very possible. Why is the Ghost Tower of Inverness fun and cool and great? Because again, it is a puzzle-based module primarily. There is a little bit of combat, but not a lot. There's more combat. Again, this is part of the issue. There's more combat in the non-tournament version because you have things like wandering monsters and extra combat encounters that were not in the original. I am going to talk about this as I think it was originally meant to sort of be, and I will leave it at that. But the reason this is fun is because it is primarily based around puzzles, and unlike the last puzzle module that I talked about, again, the Tomb of Horrors, the puzzles make sense. They're very, very logic-based. The goal of getting through the tower is that you enter through one of these areas, these spiral staircases that basically, if you look at, they come from the towers, if you look at the great picture of the keep here. And in each area, the tower is effectively set into 4 quadrants. You are trying to find the keys to open a door, which are these sort of square parts. And most of your obstacles are, basically the goal is whenever you come across a new encounter, in order to earn more points and do better effectively, whether it be against the other tournament tables as a whole, or just the people at your desk, at your own table, you need to figure out how to get through things as quickly as possible, right? Because you are on a time limit, and the module does end if you don't finish in time. But an example of that is like these tower doors, which are covered in rubble that you need to get through. There's a dog barking. I hope you can't hear that. I apologize. I have some neighbors that really don't treat their animals very well, and their dogs bark a lot, and I feel very bad. It's not really anything I can do about it, but it makes me very, very sad. I'm an animal lover. My own dog drives me insane, but I love him. Anyway, this is just a bear of an episode. I am so sorry. So the tower doors, basically, to get through them, you have to get through them, and to get through them, you have to move the rubble. Obviously, as you can imagine, it is more important, and you would like to have these stronger characters move the rubble. And if it takes you more than 3 turns to move the rubble, you lose points. Because again, you should be able to logically say, we have a fighter, we have a cleric, we have a monk. We have people with strength and agility that can move this rubble. The magic user should not be lifting the rocks. So most of these puzzles are very, very logic-based, which is what I love about it. That's probably my favorite thing about this whole module. I love logic-based puzzles because for me, for a simpleton that I am, they make me feel very smart afterwards. Figuring out logic puzzles makes me feel very smart. Moving on through the tower. So each of the tower, if you look at the rooms, just hit the microphone, I apologize. Each of the rooms that have a number in them, whether it's a tournament number or a non-tournament number, each pose basically a new challenge and a new puzzle. The speed and ability in which you are able to get through these puzzles influences your score. Each area in the explanation for these rooms ends with, assuming it's an original tournament edition, ends with a scoring section which tells you. So in this one, in the tunnel room, say, right? So after entering the room, the party has 1 round in which they may investigate the chest or leave the room. The chest is not locked and contains 7,000 gold and 4,000 silver pieces. A flat piece of metal with 1 circular end, one of the keys, is buried amidst the coins and will not be found until 2 additional rounds are spent searching the chest. If the party ignores the chest and proceeds through the room, nothing will occur. If time is spent in the room, read the following to the players. You hear a rumbling sound from the southwest. It sounds like huge quantities of earth falling into the room. Perhaps it is a cave-in. Okay. Now, as you can see here in the scoring section for that area where it tells you to find the key, combat and treasure scoring, because basically Umber Hulks walk in. It's one of the few areas that has combat. Combat and treasure scoring, which is based off the damage you take, the loot you get, whatnot. I explained it earlier, all generalized. But then you also get +5 to the team score when finding the key, because you're making progress. One of the coolest puzzles in this module is the chess room. So basically you go through, and when you're transported into this room, because if you look at the map here, you're transported through like a sort of, if you can see, there's like lines there. You are placed in the position of a chess piece. Someone on your table, I hope someone at your table legitimately knows how to play chess, because you are placed in a chess room, and I can use the visual aid for this. You are placed in one of these areas, right, where the entrances are. And you are then required to move as you would be required of the chess piece that you are, or you will take damage. This is obviously where players can get ahead of each other. If someone knows how to play chess, they are going to know how to move, and they're going to know how to navigate through the room and not take as much damage, which will not reduce from their score. So as much as you are trying to solve the puzzle of these areas, you're also trying to beat the people next to you. You're trying to solve the puzzle of how do I get a higher score than Billy next to me, right? And it's all just really cool to me. I think D&D basically played against other players is a really novel idea that I wouldn't mind seeing be brought back more. You could do things like tournaments and battle royales. That's fine. Those are great. They're fun. But having to really use your brain and figure out these puzzles and work with, but also try to beat the people that you're sitting at the table with, I think is what makes this module so cool. Not to mention, again, this chess room is awesome. You can also just fly over the chess room if you have a fly ability, like if you're the mage. But if you then later have to, if you ever have to go back through the room for whatever reason, and you flew over and you try to walk through, you're going to take all sorts of damage. Because the only thing that stops you from taking damage is having walked over it once before. So there are consequences for even when you try to be smart. But I think the puzzles themselves are very, very just fun. I liked the bugbear room, which was in this area. Basically, there's bugbears that are stuck in what's called a temporal stasis, and will attack anytime you enter. So if you enter, 4 of them attack you, right? But that's it. But then if you leave and go back in, more of them, I believe 8 of them, will attack you then. So once you're in the bugbear room, because there's 16 bugbears, you want to just stay in the room and say, well, I got to figure out what the hell's going on here, or else I'm going to die and lose all my points, because these bugbears are kicking my ass. In the bugbear room as well is another part of the key. So again, when I bring up, it's almost in a lot of ways it is, and I hate to keep referring to the Tomb of Horrors. It really is in a lot of ways the antithesis of the Tomb of Horrors. A lot of this can be figured out easily, but it is your job to figure out how to do things most efficiently and effectively to get the best score. That is the case, at least, with the tournament sort of editions. The non-tournament editions are much more... They're very cool themselves, but they're much more, what's the way to put it? They're much more based around, they're much more what you would expect from a traditional module. They're a little less logic based. They're a little more trial and error. They're not bad. They very much fit the area. They fit the theme, like this one, the Crystal Pedestal. Excuse me, not the Crystal Pedestal. Yes, the Crystal Pedestal, which has like words engraved on it. You can actually see them here. Ixum, Aristil, Pentuko, Murg, which summon monsters, which you then have to fight, obviously. It's more trial and error. It's not. The tough thing as well with these non-tournament areas, however, is that they don't grant you much benefit. This is another issue that I kind of had with these non-tournament areas that were added, because obviously everything was set up so it's not like you can find a key in the non-tournament area. It's just there more for fun and to flesh things out. So in comparison to what you're doing in the other rooms that were originally designed for the module, they feel kind of not out of place. They actually fit in very well. The illusionary ball, which this one's kind of cool. The illusionary ball basically rolls forward, and what the players see, basically, so if you have your 5 players and the illusionary ball rolls over the thief, the fighter, monk, cleric, and magic user, they just see the thief get crushed, like dead, and until you dispel it. And it can be dispelled by the thief being like, no, I'm okay, I'm not dead. But it's imagine the panic that sets in at the table when someone all lead into the room and they get crushed. Right? So they do fit in well, but they don't feel as worthwhile because they don't really have any rewards attached to them because they weren't there in the original, right? Where the module really sort of gets fun as you make your way through this tower and you collect all these different keys. And again, you're specifically trying to open the door that's here. Once you get to point 14 is the door, which is where you can put the key together into the square. And you can put the key together into the square and then get to the main room, which is where you're trying to get to, obviously, because these are the pages I already showed you of the armory. I don't know why why couldn't this be in the back of the book? I guess that's another thing I don't like. Why couldn't these pages be in the back of the book? When you actually get into the central room, there is which you can enter it from any door, from any part. So if you see it has any entrance that could be taken from any of the stairways that you enter from the outside through, which is good. It's very nice. When you get to the central room, you basically walk through a hole in the ceiling, and you are then transported back in time. So much so that it actually says here, I will read it, because this is now the real ghost tower. We're not in the keep anymore. We're in the ghost tower once you get to these next areas. It reads, although the players don't know it, Room 15 is a time portal which, due to the arcane magics which created the tower, transports those within back to the days when the Great Central Tower was still standing. Moving upwards through the tower, the party will discover 5 levels, each for one of the 4 elements, air, earth, fire, and water, and finally, the Great Domed Jewel Room, in which the Soul Gem is kept. Now, obviously, that is where the whole idea of the, quote, ghost tower comes from, because the ghost tower no longer exists. That is what you are essentially traveling through, because in the keep, if I pull up the keep, the picture of the keep again, it's like on the first page, dude. Right, there is basically supposed to be a tower in the middle of what's going on here. That is now gone. That is why it's called a ghost tower and what you're trying to get to. Okay, so once you get to these areas, right? And this is where I say you're supposed to be smart and you're fighting against the people at your table as much as you're working with them. Look what it says here. I just read that section. Scoring, +10 to the individual score of the first player to vocally suspect that the party is in times past. That's cool. It's another reason why I think this module is cool. It rewards you for thinking logically and being smart. I love it. The levels themselves have usually a very specific sort of gimmick to them as far as what the goal of them is. In the air level, there is a basically a dinosaur who swoops out to attack you, who also has some loot. That is just traditional combat and treasure scoring. Then the earth level has a Medusa, because modules just love Medusas. That's one thing I've learned. Modules really, really love Medusas, who can obviously do a ton of damage to the party and outright stop one player. And really the Medusa is a big time waste, because she won't kill you, but she can basically like put you to sleep, which obviously if that wastes 6 or 7 turns, you gotta remember you're on a time limit here. But these areas themselves all have sort of one very specific challenge. And again, you see here for the Medusa, you get bonus points for whoever doesn't get petrified or put to sleep or whatever they called it. The fire level has a fire giant on it who basically throws giant rocks at you, where you're going to lose a lot of points because those rocks are going to hit you. It is a fire giant. They don't miss. The water level is probably the most interesting because it's the longest, it's the most fleshed out. You reach the water level through a reverse gravity area, which is, if we take a look at, these are the maps now. I've been showing the maps of the keep. These are the maps of the different levels. The water level is the most interesting because there is a reverse gravity portal, which I believe is 31. Make sure I'm correct here. This is also, I should point out, I should have showed you this sooner. This is what the keep looks like. Again, another weird thing about this book, the picture, none of the maps are where they should be. All the stuff that's in the middle should be at the end, so you can just tear it out. The stuff that's on the covers is fine, but why this map of the upper ruins is not earlier when you're actually in the... Because this is the first area you're in. These are the stairways that lead you into the keep itself, so that you can then try to get into the ghost tower, which used to be here, where this big giant hole is. Why this is at the last page of the book makes absolutely no goddamn sense. The reverse gravity area, is 27. And what that does in the reverse gravity area... It's in the fire level, actually. You just float through it, basically. And chances are you're going to float through it by accident. You have to, like, sit along the wall. And you might say, well, that's not a problem because it'll let you avoid the fire giant. And it will, but you won't get points for killing the fire giant, and you won't get any points for the treasure that the fire giant has. So, which is kind of neat because, like, then it becomes, if you're playing in the tournament and you see one of your other players fly up through the reverse gravity portal against their wishes, do you go with them? Or do you try to take out the fire giant because you want those goddamn points for yourself? You see how cool this is? Can I gush any more than I already have? I really liked this module reading through it, if you haven't noticed. But the water level's the most interesting because it just has the most to do. And obviously it's the penultimate area before you actually reach the dome. And there are some monsters that you can fight. There is a hatchway which has some sort of like egg creatures. Some reptilians that are still hatchlings. There's an I can't say it. You can read it there. Ixtodal, whatever. It's a reptile lair. You can fight them. They have gems. And again, you don't have to do this, but this is all stuff that, again, I think these elemental planes, as I'll call them, pose the best opportunity of do you engage with them as much as you can, fight these enemies and deal damage and whatnot and get more points, but you also run the risk of taking damage and losing points and whatnot and taking more time, which also makes you lose points. So these areas pose the best sort of instance between, do you stick around and try to get as much as you can, or do you bail? I also feel the need to point out there is, in this water level, it's why I like the water level the most. I got the name Fandrax from my father. I stole it from him. He used it for years for his D&D characters. But I'm going to read this section. One of the puzzles in the water level is that you basically start drowning because it is all water. Remember, it's a reverse gravity field, so you're basically coming in from beneath the water, basically. And you start drowning because, especially if you're like a fighter, you're wearing plate mail and everything else and whatnot. So I will read you this section. And it has a section for a how to get the stuff off you and how quickly you drown. But here we go. Fandrax the Brave, a fighter wearing plate mail and full pack, is carrying the usual heavy items, sword, bow, etc. He falls into the water and rolls a 3 on a d6, and will therefore have 4 rounds plus modifiers to remove his possessions and armor. His strength is 17, so he gains half a round, giving him a total of 4.5 rounds before he becomes unconscious from drowning. It will take him 1 round to remove his pack and weapons, and a base of 4 rounds to remove his plate armor. His dexterity, however, is 18, so it only takes him 3 rounds to remove the plate mail. His total time used is thus 4 rounds. He had 4.5. So he successfully removes his armor and heavy items before drowning. If his dexterity had been 12, he would have received no subtraction from the time required to remove his armor, and would thus have required 5 rounds to remove everything. Since he only had 4.5 rounds, there would be a 50% chance that Fandrax would become unconscious before completely removing his plate mail. I imagine my father saw that and said, I like the name Fandrax, threw an extra X on the end of it, and away he went. So yes, that is also part of the reason why I really wanted to talk about this module. It has, I guess, where you could say I got my name from, though it's not where I got it from. I guess it's where my father got it from. But anyway, to close out the module, after you sort of save yourself from drowning, which obviously if you fall unconscious, your teammates can try to rescue you, but do they? Do they? Because that takes more time. They should. You lose points if people die. You should. You are playing against the people that you're at the table with, but you want them to survive because the team as a whole loses points if people die. So you should save them if someone falls unconscious. But when you enter the jewel room, basically, I know there's a picture of the jewel room somewhere. Where is it? Ah, it's over here. So basically, the jewel is in the middle of the room. And it's split into 7 sections. And what happens is the different sections at random will flash. And anyone caught in the flash which there is a visual aid for the jewel room as well. Show that. There's a visual aid for the jewel room. This gives you the landing area for where you come in through the, and these are some of expanded areas. This is expanded area for the fire level. This is for the water level. This one's fairly important because it shows you where you come in. This is for the jewel room. So there's a hatch. This is where you come in. Here's the gem. Now, these sections all flash from the gem in non-tournament play, it's random. In tournament play, there is a set determined order. When you enter the jewel room, you basically have to hit the jewel, right? The jewel has a certain amount of hit points. I forget how much it is. And you have to hit the jewel a bunch to basically shatter it. Not shatter it, but break it free from the force field that's around it so you can actually take it. So I'll read what happens if you get caught in one of the flashes. When the white light strikes the victim, he or she screams horribly, a long, drawn-out, wailing scream. As your vision clears, an image of the character, pale and ghostly, streams out of the body and towards the soul gem, getting smaller the nearer it gets. As the image shrinks in size, the volume of its screams diminishes. When it reaches when it reaches the gem, there is a burst of radiance, and the image is gone. The character's form lies motionless on the floor. The body is dead white, as are all the character's possessions. So if you're unfortunate enough, this is the one area where Inverness kind of takes from Tomb of Horrors. If you're unfortunate enough to get stuck in that flash, you die. And it is, let me tell you, it's a hell of a way to get your players to start acting quickly, like, oh my god, we have to break this force field, get the soul gem, and get the hell out of here before we all die. It's also a great incentive for everyone to split up, because if you're all on the same plane, and you all get hit, that's a problem, as far as your chances of surviving. But as it says here, once the force sphere is destroyed, the gem may be seized. After the gem is grasped by a character, it will not fire any more rays. Basically, after that, you're given an amulet of recall that sends you back to the... And go back to the Duke and be like, hey, we got the soul gem, we made it, we survived. And if you bring your this is why it's also not quite like Tomb of Horrors, because if someone does die and you bring their body back to the with you to the seer and the Duke, you can just revive them. The seer, who is like the Duke's right-hand man, is like, oh yeah, I can fix that. And he just fixes it. I hope this wasn't too confusing, because again, it is a little confusing in my opinion between how this was written between the tournament and the non-tournament. My goal more specifically was to talk about the tournament stuff, because I think it's how this was obviously how it was originally meant to be played, and also why I think it's so interesting. You're playing D&D, though a very normalized version of it, but you're also competing against other people both at the tournament and at your table. And I think that introduces a whole new dimension to what's actually being done that I personally love. I would love a little more friendly competition between people at the desk. Working together is great, and this does decree that you should work together, because obviously, again, as I said, if people die, you lose points and whatnot. I love the way this was set up. Again, my only issues with, and I love the puzzles themselves, that make sense. They're more based on your intuition and your ability to problem solve and think logically. The non-tournament stuff is not bad. I can appreciate it because I'm sure for an existing team, it fleshes things out. But it to me, it just didn't really feel like what the purpose of this module was. I think it has a great premise. I think the idea of like going back in time, again, quote unquote, the ghost tower, is very cool. It has some great artwork in it. The artwork in this is phenomenal, both on the front cover here and on the back. The visual aids as well also have some really nice artwork on them, which obviously you can show these visual aids to your players, and there are certain, this was for the Bugbear room, which has a sarcophagus in it. You can show this to your players to show them where the bugbears actually are in the room. Same thing with the chess room, to show them how these things lay out and what colors are where and maybe how you should be moving. This one's just more fluff. It shows you putting the puzzle pieces together. And these ones obviously are just maps of the areas I showed these. But I love the premise of this module as a whole. It's not set up how I would have. Like I said, I don't think I would have added the non-tournament stuff. Or I would have just added the non-tournament stuff and made it an expanded edition. I would have added scoring to the non-tournament stuff and whatnot, and just made it infused it into the actual tournament aspect. I think trying to have the two separate aspects didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But I loved every part of reading this module. I thought it was great. As you can tell, this was like a 16-page module, and I spent almost 50 minutes talking about it. I obviously enjoyed what was going on in this module. It's great fun. I think the puzzles make sense. I think the added incentive of doing things as best you can and thinking on your feet is great. Just not necessarily set up as maybe I would have done it, but that doesn't mean it's bad. I would have also really changed the way the maps are set up. I hated the way the maps were set up. I mentioned that earlier. But yeah, Ghost Tower of Inverness, I'm going to end this episode because someone just started mowing their lawn. Ghost Tower of Inverness, big thumbs up. If you can get a hold of this one, do it. Play it with your friends and watch them compete again. Run it in the tournament, in my opinion, and watch them try to compete against each other. I think that would be very, very, very fun. This was a very rambly episode. I apologize for that. It's kind of the mood I'm in. I'm a little scatterbrained right now, I will admit. Life's a little rough, but that's okay. So, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.